Good morning. Today in the Gospel, of course, we hear this wonderful story of the account of the meeting of Jesus with the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and it's full of, I believe, symbolism that we might think about. I was thinking as I contemplated the scriptures for today that somehow we, in our own Christian journey, can identify perhaps with those disciples who walked along that road with Jesus. We might even be able to identify with Jesus himself in the way that they were ministered to him, by him. And what do I mean by that? So I was thinking this is an opportunity today to reflect on maybe themes of kindness, mercy, love, and forgiveness, and all kinds of other virtues to which we aspire as people of faith. And what do I mean by that? I was thinking that if you're like me, you might have had many experiences in your life where you witnessed a moment when someone was lifted out of some kind of darkness and received some kind of light, or was lifted out of some kind of sadness to some kind of joy, or maybe a sense of hopelessness which transformed to hope. This is what I take from these scriptures today specifically. And we might, maybe in our contemplation of these scriptures today, especially the story of Jesus and these disciples on the road to Emmaus, maybe think about our own experience of even conversion and change, and the various ways we might experience that, not only in our own life, but in what we see in others, and sometimes especially by the actions, or maybe brought about by the actions of Christian people or people of goodwill who show kindness and mercy, love and forgiveness to others. We might think of the corporal works of mercy, those guidelines for our Christian life which tell us that we ought to place ourselves in service to other people. Imagine someone approaching a food bank looking for food for their children and feeling a sense of despair as they feel reduced, if I can put it that way, to that kind of existence, and meeting someone at that food bank or food pantry who shows them utter kindness, mercy, love. Imagine the response of a person in that situation who feels that someone of goodwill has ministered to them, has given them some kind of glimmer of hope, to whatever extent that might be. Or how about a person who is really facing some kind of serious illness, who ends up in a hospital and is feeling maybe hopeless about that illness, and a very kind nurse standing at that person's bedside offers him or her a word of hope, a word of consolation, and shows that person great dignity and respect, even in their miserable state. Or the missionary who goes out into the world to far-off places and dedicates him or herself to serving people with leprosy, or people who live in places where poverty is extreme. And the reaction of those people when they are treated so charitably and kindly by such people. I could continue to go down the list of all kinds of examples of people who have been treated with kindness, love, mercy, and forgiveness. We all have maybe stories in our own life where we ourselves have been instruments of God's love and mercy in the way that we've treated others, especially those who maybe the world doesn't think are worthy of that. These are the things I think about as I contemplate the scriptures today. We heard today in this first reading from the Acts of the Apostle these words: God raised him up, God raised Jesus up, releasing him from the throes of death, because it was impossible for him to be held by it. God raised him up, releasing him from the throes of death. I think that our Christian faith tells us that what Jesus has done for us, that is, by sacrificing himself, giving himself for us, dying for our sins, becoming the perfect sacrifice on the cross, and being raised from the dead. In a sense, Jesus models in that what we hope for. We hope, of course, to share in the resurrection to new life. We have that in our minds, I think. But these things take on a certain characteristic, even in this life. Jesus, who is raised up from the dead, from the throes of death, is given new life, resurrection, and promises the same to us. I think that in our Christian faith, when we place ourselves in service to other people, we are instruments of that kind of hopeful resurrection to new life. Any of those examples we might think of where people show kindness, love, and mercy, and even forgiveness to others. We are instruments of God's love. We participate in this great mission of Jesus to bring resurrection and life to others, especially those who are in the throes of death, whatever that might mean. And so how do I tie that into this story of Jesus meeting these disciples on the road to Emmaus? It says that as they walked along with him, that they didn't recognize him. And yet he explained to them the scriptures, and they reflected later that as he explained the scriptures to them, as he spoke to them on the road, that their hearts were on fire. He moved them somehow, even though they didn't recognize him. And then later, when they settle in for the night, they share a meal. And it says that Jesus took bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them. And with that, their eyes were opened. They recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread. Their hearts were already on fire because of the way that he ministered to them, but now they clearly recognized him. And what did they do after they recognized him? They ran back to Jerusalem. They couldn't wait to tell others what had happened. They couldn't wait to be witnesses to the resurrection themselves, to share their joy with other people, in a sense to preach the word that they had received. And I think that this is somehow a model to us. Jesus models to us how we are to live our Christian lives in everything, not just in accepting the message of Jesus' death and resurrection, but also by putting into practice in our own lives what we have received and what Jesus has done for us. So here we are today. We're gathered together in this chapel, and we're celebrating the Mass. It's interesting to me that as we gather here to celebrate the Mass, we kind of follow the chronology of this particular gospel. You know, we've heard the scriptures. We, like those disciples who contemplated the scriptures as Jesus explained it to them. And then we move from this contemplation of the scriptures and understanding who Jesus is in that to the altar, where we celebrate the Eucharist. And in this celebration of the Eucharist, we kind of summarize, if you will, the whole story of Jesus. We remember his earthly life. We remember his ministry given to others, especially as we read the scriptures, but also as we come together around the altar to celebrate the Eucharist. And we recall the words of Jesus at the Last Supper. He says, "Take this bread, eat it. This is my body given for you." He says, "Take this cup, this chalice. This is my blood shed for the forgiveness of sins." And he says, "Do this in memory of me." Do this in memory of me. I think that those words, "do this in memory of me," don't simply apply to a reenactment of the Lord's Supper, where Jesus sits at the table with his disciples. Do this in memory of me means everything that Jesus has done. Everything. And what did Jesus do so well as he walked around this earth? He ministered to people in need. He fed the hungry, he cured the sick, gave sight to the blind, gave hope to people without hope. He raised people from the dead. He forgave sins. And he said, "Do this in memory of me. What I have done, so you must do." In this Mass today, there will come a point when we say, "Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world, have mercy on us." Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world, grant us peace. And at that moment of the Mass, maybe often not clearly seen, the priest who celebrates the Mass will break the host, break it in half. He breaks the host. And that is very symbolic. As Jesus, the Lamb of God, forgives us of our sins and gives us peace, he does that by sharing his very life with us. And how do we share that life, that Eucharist, with one another? But by breaking the bread. We break it. We have to break it in order for it to be distributed. It's broken so that we can receive it. What's broken? The very body of Jesus. The very life of Jesus is broken, in a sense, broken so that it can be shared. It's sacrificed. It's given for us so that we might share in the life it offers. It's pretty simple. And we remember that Jesus says, "Do this in memory of me, and as I have done, so you must do." This is where we come in right now. You see, we can come to church, we can contemplate the scriptures, we can share the Eucharist, but if we leave this chapel today and get back in our cars and go back into the ordinary everyday activities of our lives without putting into specific practice that which we say we do here, then we must ask the question, why bother? You see, Jesus calls us, like him, to be instruments of God's love, to be instruments of God's mercy, to be instruments of God's charity and forgiveness. That's simply what it's all about. And so today, as we gather in this Mass, as we break bread together, the bread of the Eucharist, as we receive the very life of God in this great gift that is given to us, let's remember that it is not just a nice idea to be that nurse at the side of the bed showing kindness, to be that missionary going off to some far-off place, giving hope to the poor. It's not just a nice idea to hand out food at a food pantry. It's actually an obligation. Let's do that as these disciples who recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread ran back to Jerusalem to share the news. And I believe they shared that news not just with their words, but with their actions. Let us do the same. Amen.